Hi, I'm Mr. Otway and this is an Osset History podcast, this time focused on the people who made the journey across the United States. In other words, the migrants. We'll consider why people wanted to move west, the different types of migrants, a few famous migrants, and a story that everybody always remembers about the American West. There are many different reasons why people moved west. Individuals might have had one reason or several reasons for moving. Some reasons were pull factors, in that there were attractive things about the West that pulled people towards it, like a bee to a sunflower. And some reasons that were push factors, in that they didn't want to live in the East anymore, and something was pushing them out. In the textbook, Edexcel suggests a number of reasons for people migrating west. First, let's look at some push factors. Things that were pushing people out of the East to look for somewhere else to live. Well, in 1837, the banks in the East collapsed, causing chaos for the economy. For example, in 1839, 20,000 people who were unemployed demonstrated in Philadelphia, which shows that the collapse of the banks also made there be a collapse in the economy, and some people lost their jobs, and perhaps that pushed them to look west. 1837 was a bad year, because not only did the banks collapse, but wheat prices tumbled, so farmers couldn't make as much money. Missouri was a centre for wheat growing, and many farmers there faced ruin. Also, in that terrible year of 1837, wages in the East were cut by an average of 40%. We have seen that things were not always wonderful in the East, but not many people chose to just up sticks and run off to the West, because there was nothing there. Just miles and miles of nothing but beautiful landscape with the odd Indian tribe and some buffalo herds. However, word began to arrive of reasons to move west, from the early pioneers, such as mountain men and fur trappers. Here are some of the push factors. A big push factor that really drew people to the west was the 1848 discovery of gold, in California. I think it's pretty obvious why this made people want to move west, so I'll explain. There was also the fact that mountain men told of rich, fertile lands in the west, which encouraged some people who thought of making a living farming in the west. The mountain men, by the way, were men who travelled across the Sierra Nevada and Rocky Mountains selling skins and furs to traders when they met them, or occasionally returning east to sell their furs and skins. They found the passes through which many of the later wagon trails followed. The early pioneers, such as mountain men, also told of areas with huge amounts of fish and animals to hunt for furs. Oregon was a place in the West where a proper settlement began to appear because a government act of 1842 made land there available relatively cheaply, and the land in Oregon was one of those places the mountain men had said was a very fertile place. So some people decided to take advantage of this government act of 1842 and to move there. Christian missionaries were also pulled to the West due to the larger numbers of Indians that they thought they could convert to Christianity. Then there is the American belief in manifest destiny, that they were destined to populate the plains, regardless of any Plains Indians who already lived there. Manifest destiny, coupled with the fact that the US government were worried that Mexico, France and Britain might try to take back land on the Great Plains that they had once owned, led them to encouraging people to settle in the West. Government support was another reason why people might have wanted to move west. What type of people wanted to move west? There were the mountain men and fur trappers in the early days, who then told of fertile land as we've discussed, and this in turn encouraged people who wanted to move west to farm. They initially had no choice but to travel on wagon trails, often in large groups and setting off from frontier towns such as the town of Independence in Missouri. Another major group were the gold prospectors, who moved west in their thousands, trying to get rich quick. There were homesteaders who took advantage of the declaration of public domain land, see podcast on homesteaders, and cattle drivers moved across the plains, before cattle ranches moved onto the plains. Now we're going to look at a famous migrant and a famous group of migrants. First, Jim Bridger was a mountain man who had 3 Indian wives in his lifetime and clearly established very good relations with the Indians. It must be noted that mountain men brought mostly trouble to the Indians in the form of weapons, new diseases and alcohol, apart from the fact that they went back east and told people about fertile land and fur in the west, which started the big migrations. which, as we know, ultimately ended with the destruction of the Indian way of life. However, the Indians seemed to like Jim. He began with beaver hunting for the valuable beaver fur before buying the Rocky Mountain Fur Company alongside some other men. But the fur trade collapsed, so he built a trading post, which is a bit like a little town in the middle of nowhere. He built it along the Oregon Trail so he could sell his supplies to migrants who were using the trail to get to, you guessed it, Oregon. He helped to lead hundreds of wagons safely through the Rocky Mountains, and he found a route that made the Oregon Trail 61 miles shorter, which became named the Bridger Pass. And the Bridger Pass was later used as a route along which the Union Pacific Railroad Company built a track. He went on to find another track which was called the Bridger Trail. In 1865 he helped the army by acting as a scout in the Red Cloud War, and who better to have? There must surely have been nobody who knew the West better than Jim Bridger. He died blind and suffering from arthritis in 1881 on a farm that he retired to. So Jim Bridger is a really good example of what the mountain men did. They knew their way around the place, an example of the job that he did, which was fur trading, and the army made use of mountain men sometimes as scouts, and you've got an example there of a particular occasion when he acted as a scout. Jim Bridger, good example perhaps to use in your exam. As for a famous group of migrants, we should look no further than the 60 wagons and 300 migrants of the Donner Party, 80 of which decided to listen to the Donner brothers, who said they knew a shortcut. Well, we've heard all that before, but I bet it hasn't ended up with you having to eat somebody's flesh. The shortcut took them across the desert. They lost 300 cattle, 4 wagons, and 1 man shot another dead in an argument. When they got to the Sierra Nevada mountain range, the snows came early, and they ended up trapped in the mountains. People began to starve to death, and 15 people decided to risk a journey through the mountains to seek help. 8 men, 5 women, and 2 Indian guides. 4 men froze to death in a snowstorm, so they were eaten by their comrades, who were starving. But they did label the bodies so that nobody ended up eating their dead husband. The Indians refused to eat human flesh, so the solution that the group came up with was to shoot and eat the Indians. They must have fancied an Indian that night. Finally, the 9 who survived the journey reached Johnson's Ranch after a 32-day journey. Word spread and a rescue operation set out. When they got to the Donner Party, it was like the scene of a horror film. Half of the party were dead, and the other half had survived by eating their dead friends and relatives. One of the rescues said they found one of the Donner brothers' bodies with the head cracked open and the brains removed. That's food for thought. Anyway, apart from my terrible puns, the point is that although this is an extreme example, travelling west was an incredibly perilous, dangerous journey, and not one that people decided to make lightly. It really highlights how strong those push and pull factors were if people were willing to risk everything to cross the plains. And make no mistake, the Donner Party was not the only wagon train that ended in disaster. Hundreds died crossing the plains. Thankfully, the migrants were able to take the train west after the railroads were constructed in the 1860s, and they were much safer. So push and pull factors influenced people to move west, and there were many different types of people who chose to move west. Some of them, in particular with regards to homesteaders, with the help of the government. Jim Bridger is an example of a famous mountain man, and the Donner Party ended in America's first doner kebab. I've been Mr. Otway, and this was an Osset History Podcast.